The morning air on Kithara Prime carried the scent of blood and failure. 3 young Kithari stood before the Council of Elders, their scaled heads hanging low in shame. Their names were Zash, Kira, and Thek, and they had just become the first cubs in over 2 centuries to fail the trial of fangs. Zash was the largest of the 3, his dark green scales marked with fading blue patterns that should have glowed bright with pride. Instead, they remained dull and cold. His claws, each as long as a human finger, trembled slightly as he stared at the stone floor. Beside him, Kira kept her silver-scaled arms wrapped around herself, trying to make her 7-foot frame seem smaller. Her yellow eyes darted nervously between the towering elders above them. Thek, the youngest, barely 6 feet tall with copper-colored scales, fought back tears that would only bring more shame. The Great Hall of Judgment stretched high above them, its walls carved with images of legendary hunts and victories. Massive stone pillars supported a ceiling that disappeared into shadows. In the center, 12 ancient elders sat on thrones made from the bones of great beasts their ancestors had killed. Each elder was over 9 feet tall, their scales bearing the deep colors and bright patterns that came with age and countless victories. Elder Vex, the largest of them all, leaned forward on his throne. His black scales seemed to absorb the light from the ceremonial fires burning around the hall. When he spoke, his voice rumbled like distant thunder. "You were given one simple task," Elder Vex said, his words echoing off the stone walls. "Hunt the Razorfang beast, bring back its heart. Prove you are worthy to be called Kithari warriors." The 3 cubs said nothing. They had indeed found the Razorfang beast in the deep forest beyond the city. They had tracked it for 3 days, following its trail through dense undergrowth and over rocky hills. But when they finally cornered the massive creature, something had gone wrong. Zash had frozen when the beast charged. Instead of meeting it with claws and fangs as tradition demanded, he had stepped back. That moment of hesitation had cost them everything. Kira had tried to attack from the side, but without Zash leading the charge, her strike had been weak and poorly timed. The beast had knocked her aside easily. Thek had managed to wound it, but the creature had escaped into the deep caves where even adult warriors feared to follow. They had returned to the city empty-handed, bearing only scratches and bruises instead of glory and proof of their kill. Elder Mira, whose white scales marked her as the oldest among them, spoke next. Her voice was softer than Elder Vex's, but somehow more frightening. "In all our history, no cub has failed the trial of fangs and lived to see another season," she said. "The weak do not survive among the Kithari. The weak do not deserve to survive. But perhaps," Elder Vex said, rising from his throne, "there is still a way for you to find honor in death." The other elders murmured their agreement. This was the old way, the traditional way. When a Kithari proved too weak for their society, they were given one final chance to die with dignity. "You will be taken to Ice Vault," Elder Vex announced, "the frozen moon where our ancestors once hunted the great ice beasts. You will be given basic supplies and left to face the cold alone. If you can survive until the next full moon, you may return and face the trial of fangs again. If you cannot," he did not need to finish. Everyone in the hall knew what happened to those sent to Ice Vault. The moon's surface was locked in permanent winter, with temperatures that could freeze a Kithari solid in minutes. Violent storms raged across its surface for days at a time. No plant or animal life existed there anymore. It was a place of death, chosen specifically because it offered no hope of survival. "Do you accept this final chance for honor?" Elder Vex asked. Zash lifted his head slowly. His blue markings flickered once, briefly, before going dark again. "We accept," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Kira and Thek nodded their agreement. They had no choice. In Kithari society, to refuse this offer would bring shame not only to themselves but to their families and their entire bloodlines. At least this way they might die as warriors rather than live as outcasts. The elders stood as one, their massive forms casting long shadows across the hall. The ceremony was over. Guards moved forward to escort the 3 cubs away. In the holding chambers beneath the Great Hall, the cubs waited for the transport ship to be prepared. They sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The stone walls around them were covered with carvings showing the great deeds of past heroes, warriors slaying terrible beasts, leading their people to victory, conquering new worlds. None of the carvings showed failure. An old guard brought them their exile supplies, a small pack for each cub containing basic survival gear, emergency rations that would last maybe 5 days. A simple shelter that could protect against wind but not the brutal cold of ice vault. A single energy cell that would power a small heating unit for perhaps one night. Not much, is it? The guard said. He was past his prime. His green scales faded and marked with old battle scars. But then it's not meant to keep you alive. It's meant to give you a chance to die fighting. Thek looked at the meager supplies and felt his courage finally break. Why? He asked, his young voice cracking. Why must we die just because we failed once? The old guard studied him for a long moment. Because that is our way, he said finally. The strong survive. The weak perish. It has always been so. But what if there was another way? Kira asked quietly. What if strength wasn't just about killing? The guard's expression hardened. Do not speak such words, he warned. They are the thoughts of prey animals, not predators. If you must die, die as Cathari. Hours later, they stood in the cargo bay of a military transport ship. Through the small viewing port, they could see ice vault growing larger as they approached. The moon's surface was a uniform white, broken only by the dark shadows of deep crevasses and the swirling patterns of endless snowstorms. The ship's captain, a scarred veteran named Commander Grex, activated the cargo bay doors. Cold air rushed in immediately, so bitter that it burned their lungs and made their scales ache. This is as far as we go, Commander Grex announced. The drop zone is marked. Your packs contain emergency beacons. If you wish to call for retrieval to die aboard the ship instead of on the surface, activate them. Otherwise, may your deaths bring honor to your families. The three cubs gathered their packs and stepped to the edge of the cargo bay. Below them, Ice Vault's frozen surface waited like a hungry beast. Zash was the first to jump. He spread his arms wide and fell like a stone toward the white wasteland below. Kira followed, then Thek. The transport ship sealed its doors and departed immediately, leaving them alone on the most hostile world in their solar system. As they picked themselves up from the snowdrift where they had landed, the reality of their situation began to sink in. The cold was worse than anything they had ever experienced. The wind cut through their scales like knives. In the distance, they could see a massive storm approaching, its dark clouds promising even worse conditions. They had perhaps an hour before that storm reached them. After that, their chances of survival would drop to nearly zero. But they were still alive, and where there was life, there was the possibility of finding a way to continue living. Even if that way was not the traditional path their people had chosen for them. The three exiled cubs shouldered their packs and began walking across the frozen wasteland, searching for shelter that might not even exist. The storm hit them faster than expected. One moment Zash could see the horizon across the frozen wasteland of Ice Vault. The next, walls of snow and ice surrounded them like a living creature trying to swallow them whole. The three Kithari cubs huddled together, their bodies pressed close as they tried to share what little warmth they had. The wind screamed around them with a sound like dying animals. Ice crystals struck their scales with enough force to leave small cuts and bruises. Each breath burned their lungs and left them gasping for more air. "We need shelter," Kira shouted over the howling wind. Her silver scales had turned almost white with frost, and her lips were beginning to show the blue tinge that meant serious cold damage. Thek was in the worst condition. Being the smallest and youngest, he was losing heat faster than the others. His copper scales had gone completely dull, and he could barely keep his eyes open. Can't keep going," he mumbled through chattering teeth. Zash forced himself to stand, fighting against winds that tried to knock him down with every step. He was their leader, even in exile. Even in failure, he had to find a way to keep them alive, at least until they could die with some dignity. "There!" he called out, pointing through the storm. In the distance, barely visible through the swirling snow, he could see what looked like a dark shape against the white landscape. Something over there. They stumbled forward, supporting each other as they fought their way through snowdrifts that came up to their chests. Each step was a battle against the cold and wind that seemed determined to stop them from reaching whatever shelter might exist ahead. As they got closer, the dark shape began to take form. It was definitely artificial, too regular and geometric to be a natural formation. The structure was mostly buried under years of accumulated snow and ice, but part of it still rose above the surface. Most importantly, there were signs that it was generating heat. The snow around it had melted and refrozen into smooth ice, and Zash could swear he felt warmer air coming from somewhere nearby. "What is it?" Kira asked as they approached the structure. It was unlike anything in Kithari architecture. where their buildings were all sharp angles and aggressive lines meant to show strength and dominance. This structure seemed designed for different purposes entirely. Its walls curved gently, and there were large windows that would have been completely impractical in a military building. Thek collapsed against what appeared to be a door, his strength finally giving out completely. "Don't care what it is," he gasped. "Just need to get warm." The door was clearly not built for Cathari hands. It was too small, and the opening mechanism was designed for creatures with much more delicate fingers. But desperation gave them strength, and after several minutes of clawing and prying, they managed to force it open. Warm air rushed out to meet them, carrying strange scents and sounds. Somewhere inside, they could hear soft music playing. Not the harsh, rhythmic war songs of their people, but something gentle and complex. That seemed to flow like water. They stumbled inside and immediately understood that they were not alone. The interior of the structure was clearly designed for creatures, much smaller than themselves. The ceiling was too low, forcing them to duck their heads. The furniture was tiny and delicate, and everywhere there were signs of habitation by something that was definitely not Cathari. The walls were covered with images and symbols they didn't recognize. There were shelves filled with objects that seemed to serve no obvious purpose. Not weapons or tools, but things that appeared to exist purely for their beauty or interest. Soft lights provided gentle illumination that was easy on their eyes after the harsh glare of the storm outside. And sitting at a small table, staring at them with obvious terror, was the strangest creature any of them had ever seen. It was tiny compared to them, maybe 5.5 feet tall and built much more lightly than any intelligent species they knew about. Its skin was a soft brown color with no scales or natural armor at all. It had no claws to speak of, no visible fangs, and no natural weapons of any kind. Its hair was black and fell in small curls around its face. Most shocking of all, its eyes were not the harsh yellow or red of predator species, but a warm brown that seemed to express complex emotions. For a long moment, none of them moved. The small creature's hands shook as it slowly reached for something on the table. Probably a weapon, though Zash couldn't imagine what damage such a tiny being could do to 3 Cathari, even weakened as they were. "Please," the creature said in a language none of them understood, but the tone was clear enough. It was asking them not to hurt it. Thek chose that moment to collapse completely, his body hitting the floor with a heavy thud. The sound seemed to break whatever spell had held them all frozen. The small creature jumped up from its chair and rushed toward them, all fear apparently forgotten. It knelt beside Thek and began examining him with quick, efficient movements. Its hands moved over the young Cathari's scales, checking for injuries and signs of cold damage. Then it looked up at Zash and Kira and began speaking rapidly in its strange language, pointing at Thek and then at different parts of the room. The meaning was clear enough. It was trying to help. Zash felt his world shift slightly. In all his education about other species, he had been taught that intelligence was linked to strength. Smart creatures were dangerous creatures. The weak ones were prey animals that relied on speed or hiding to survive. But this creature was clearly intelligent. The structure around them proved that. And yet it was trying to help 3 predators who could easily kill it. The creature, was it male or female? It was impossible to tell. Ran to a wall panel and began adjusting controls. Immediately, the air in the room grew warmer. Then it disappeared through a doorway and returned moments later with an armload of soft materials that looked like they were designed for warmth and comfort. Working with obvious urgency, it began wrapping the materials around Thek's unconscious form. Then it looked at Zash and Kira and pointed to chairs near a heating unit, clearly indicating that they should sit down and get warm. "Why?" Kira asked in their own language, knowing the creature couldn't understand her but needing to voice the question anyway. "Why are you helping us?" The creature tilted its head at the sound of her voice, and for a moment their eyes met. In those brown eyes, Kira saw something she had never expected to find in a creature so small and defenseless. There was intelligence there, yes, but also something else, something that her people had no word for because they had never valued it. Compassion. The creature brought them containers of warm liquid that tasted better than anything they had ever experienced. It moved around the room, adjusting controls and bringing them more warming materials, never seeming to worry that they might hurt it. Every few minutes it would check on Thek, monitoring his breathing and the color of his scales. Slowly, Warmth began to return to their bodies. With warmth came the ability to think more clearly, and with clear thought came questions that had no easy answers. Who was this creature? How had it come to be living alone on Ice Vault? Why was it helping them instead of calling for others of its kind to come and kill them? And most disturbing of all, if this tiny defenseless being could show such kindness to strangers, what did that say about the Kithari way of life? Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the strange structure, 3 exiled predator cubs experienced something completely new in their lives. They experienced safety provided not by their own strength, but by the freely given kindness of someone they had been taught to think of as prey. Thek's breathing gradually became stronger and more regular. The color began to return to his scales, and somewhere in the back of their minds, all 3 cubs began to wonder if everything they had been taught about strength and weakness might be wrong. The small creature settled into a chair across from them, watching them carefully but no longer showing fear. It said something in its soft language, and though they couldn't understand the words, the tone was unmistakable. It was welcoming them home. The human's name was Marcus Chen, though it took nearly a week for the cubs to learn this simple fact. Communication proved to be one of their biggest challenges, but also one of their most important achievements. Marcus had been living alone on Ice Vault for almost 2 years, studying the ancient ruins scattered across the moon's surface. He was a xenoarchaeologist, a specialist in the remains of alien civilizations, and Ice Vault held secrets that had drawn him from Earth despite the danger and isolation. On the 3rd day after the cubs' arrival, Marcus managed to get his universal translator working with their language. The device was damaged and old, so the translations were often awkward and incomplete, but it was enough for basic communication. "You are Kithari," Marcus said slowly, reading from the translator's display. His voice was soft and careful, nothing like the commanding tones the cubs were used to from their elders. "Yes," Zash replied, still not entirely comfortable with speaking to what his people would consider a prey animal. "We are exiled, sent here to die." Marcus looked confused by this. He typed something into his translator and waited for it to process. "Die? Why die? You're young, healthy." "We failed," Kira said simply. "Failure means death." "It is the way. Whose way?" Marcus asked. The translator struggled with the concept, producing several different possible meanings before settling on one that was close enough. The question caught all 3 cubs off guard. They had never considered that their way might not be the only way. It was simply how things were, how they had always been. Thek, who had recovered enough to sit up and participate in conversations, spoke for the first time since regaining consciousness. "It is the way of strength. The strong survive. The weak die. This keeps the species strong." Marcus was quiet for a long time, studying them with those strange brown eyes. Finally he said, "On my world we have different way. We help the weak become strong. We protect those who cannot protect themselves, but why?" Zash asked. The concept was so foreign to him that he struggled to understand it. "What benefit do the strong gain from helping the weak?" Marcus smiled, and the cubs learned what that expression meant among his people. Not a threat or challenge, but a sign of happiness and warmth. Because today's weak might be tomorrow's strong. Because helping others makes us stronger as a group. Because... He paused, searching for words the translator could handle. Because it feels right. That afternoon, Marcus showed them his work. He led them outside to the ancient ruins he had been studying, structures that predated both human and Kithari civilizations by thousands of years. The ruins were magnificent even in their decay. Massive stone buildings rose from the ice, their walls covered with intricate carvings that told stories the cubs couldn't read. Bridges spanned between towers, some still intact despite countless centuries of weathering. In the center of the complex stood what must have been a great hall or temple, its dome cracked but still impressive. The people who built this, Marcus explained as they walked among the ruins. They were called the architects. We know almost nothing about them except what their buildings tell us. Were they strong? Kira asked, running her clawed hand along one of the carved walls. The stone was incredibly hard, and the detail in the carvings was finer than anything Kithari artists had ever achieved. "Very strong," Marcus said, "but look at this." He led them to a section of wall where the carvings were different. Instead of the grand architectural scenes found elsewhere, These showed groups of different creatures working together. Some were large and powerful, others small and quick, still others that seemed to specialize in different tasks. They were not one species. Marcus continued. The architects were many species working together, each contributing what they did best. Zash studied the carvings carefully. His education had taught him that when different species met, the stronger conquered the weaker. It was natural law. But these carvings showed something different, cooperation rather than domination. What happened to them? Thek asked. Marcus pointed to another section of wall where the carvings showed scenes of conflict and destruction. We think they forgot how to work together. They began to fight among themselves. The strong tried to dominate the weak. Eventually, they destroyed themselves. The cubs spent the rest of the day exploring the ruins with Marcus. He showed them chambers filled with ancient machinery that had once powered the complex. Libraries where thousands of books had once been stored, though only fragments remained. Workshops where the architects had created tools and art with equal skill. But it was in the evening, as they sat around Marcus's heating unit sharing a meal, that the most important learning took place. Marcus had prepared food for all of them, though it meant using up more of his supplies than he could easily afford. When Thek pointed this out, Marcus simply shrugged. Food is for sharing, he said. Alone I have enough for many months. With friends we have enough for several weeks, but weeks with friends are better than months alone. Friends? Zash repeated the word slowly. The translator had trouble with it, offering several possible meanings. People who care about each other, Marcus explained. People who help each other without expecting payment. People who choose to be together. Kira tilted her head, trying to understand. But we are predators. You are. What are you? Marcus laughed, a sound that was completely unlike any vocalization the cubs had ever heard. It wasn't aggressive or challenging. It seemed to come from genuine happiness. I am human, he said. And yes, compared to you, I am weak and soft and probably qualify as prey. But I'm also intelligent, creative, and capable of caring about others. Those things make me strong in different ways. Over the following days, Marcus taught them many things. He showed them how to use his equipment to monitor weather patterns, predicting when storms would come and when it would be safe to venture outside. He taught them about human music, playing recordings of songs from Earth that spoke of love and loss and hope in ways that HFY War chants never had. Most importantly, he showed them how to work together as a team, rather than as a hierarchy of dominance. When they explored the ruins, each of them contributed something different. Zash was the strongest and could move heavy objects that blocked their way. Kira was the fastest and most agile, able to climb to high places and scout ahead. Thek was the smallest and could fit through narrow passages that the others couldn't navigate. Marcus contributed his knowledge and his tools, but also something else, a way of seeing that was completely foreign to them. Where they saw only success or failure, strength or weakness, Marcus saw potential and possibility. You did not fail your trial, he told them one evening as they sat looking out at the aurora that danced across Icevault's sky. You simply approached it differently than your people expected. We showed weakness, Zash said, the shame still heavy in his voice. I hesitated when I should have attacked. That is not the HFY way. Maybe you hesitated because you were thinking, Marcus suggested. Maybe you were trying to find a better solution than just charging in with claws and fangs. There is no better solution, Kira said automatically. Strength conquers all. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then pointed to the ruins around them. The architects thought that too in the end. Look where it led them. That night, as they settled down to sleep in the warmth and safety of Marcus's shelter, each of the cubs found themselves thinking thoughts that would have been considered treasonous back on Kythera Prime. What if strength wasn't just about physical power? What if true strength included the ability to show kindness to others, even when they couldn't help you in return? What if the measure of a person wasn't how many enemies they could defeat, but how many friends they could protect? Outside, the wind howled across the frozen wasteland. But inside, warmed by more than just the heating unit, 3 exiled HFY cubs began to understand that there might be more than one way to be strong. And in his small bed across the room, Marcus Chen smiled in his sleep, dreaming of ancient civilizations and the hope that maybe, just maybe, the mistakes of the past didn't have to be repeated forever. The HFY patrol ship descended through Icevault's atmosphere like a dark blade, cutting through the endless gray clouds. Its angular hull was designed to intimidate, all sharp edges and weapon ports that spoke of a civilization built for war. The ship's arrival sent shockwaves through the ice below, causing avalanches in the distant mountains and disturbing the peaceful quiet that had surrounded Marcus's shelter for weeks. Zash was the first to spot it through the observation window. His scales immediately began shifting to the deep red pattern that indicated alarm and aggression, an instinctive response he hadn't used since arriving on the frozen moon. "Kithari's ship," he announced, his voice tight with emotions he couldn't name. Fear was part of it, but also something else. For the first time in his life, he didn't want to see his own people. Marcus rushed to his equipment console, fingers flying over controls as he tried to analyze the approaching vessel. "Military configuration," he muttered, reading the displays. "Heavy weapons, long-range capabilities. This isn't a rescue ship." Kira and Thek joined them at the window, watching as the ship settled onto the ice field about a kilometer away. Its landing thrusters melted the surface into a perfectly smooth circle, and steam rose around it like incense at a funeral. "They've come for our bodies," Thek said quietly. His copper scales had gone completely dull, not with cold this time, but with dread. "To complete the ceremony and return our remains to our families. Except we're not dead," Kira pointed out. "No," Zash agreed. "We're not, and that's going to be a problem." Marcus looked between them, trying to understand the full implications of what was happening. "What will they do when they find you alive?" "That depends on who's commanding the ship," Zash said. "If it's someone reasonable, they might just take us back for retrial. If it's one of the hardliners," he didn't need to finish. They all understood what the hardliners would do to cubs who had not only survived their exile, but had been living alongside what they would consider a prey animal. Through the ship's sensors, Marcus watched as a group of figures emerged from the patrol vessel. Even at this distance, their size was intimidating. They moved across the ice with the confident stride of apex predators, following the trail that led directly to the shelter. "How many?" Kira asked. "6, Marcus replied, adjusting his instruments for a better view. "All adults, all armed? The one in front is bigger than the others." Zash felt his blood turn cold. He recognized that stride, that posture of absolute authority. "Elder Vex," he whispered. The name sent chills through all of them. Elder Vex was known throughout Kithari society as the most traditional and uncompromising member of the council. He had personally overseen hundreds of executions of those deemed unworthy. His presence here meant that their survival would be viewed not as a miracle, but as an affront to everything their people believed. "You need to hide," Kira told Marcus urgently. "If they find you here with us, they'll kill you without hesitation." But Marcus shook his head. "This is my home. I won't hide in my own shelter." "You don't understand," Thek pleaded. "Elder Vex doesn't just kill enemies. He enjoys it. He believes that mercy is a disease that weakens the species." "Then maybe it's time someone showed him that mercy can be a strength," Marcus said calmly. Before any of them could argue further, the shelter's door burst open. The frame, designed for human-sized occupants, barely contained Elder Vex as he forced his way inside. His black scales seemed to absorb the light, and his red eyes blazed with fury as he took in the scene before him. Behind him came 5 other Kithari warriors, their weapons drawn and ready. They spread out around the room, blocking all possible exits. Their faces showed the same disgust and rage that twisted Elder Vex's features. "Abomination," Elder Vex growled, his voice filling the small space like thunder. "Not only do you live when you should be dead, but you contaminate yourselves with association with this creature." His gaze fell on Marcus, who stood his ground, despite being surrounded by beings that could tear him apart without effort. The human's hands trembled slightly, but his brown eyes met Elder Vex's red ones without flinching. "What are you?" Elder Vex demanded, addressing Marcus in heavily accented but understandable basic standard. "I'm a human," Marcus replied steadily. "My name is Marcus Chen. I'm a xenoarchaeologist studying the ancient ruins on this moon." Elder Vex's expression grew even darker. "Human, yes, I know of your species. Weak scavengers who spread across the galaxy like parasites, feeding on the achievements of stronger races." "Actually," Marcus said, and there was steel in his quiet voice now, "we're explorers, scientists, and builders. We seek knowledge and try to learn from the past so we can build a better future." The elder laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "Knowledge, learning. The delusions of prey animals who think cleverness can replace strength. He turned to the three cubs. And you allow this creature to fill your minds with its poison. You bring shame not only to yourselves but to your entire bloodlines. Zash stepped forward, placing himself between Elder Vex and Marcus. It was a gesture that would have been unthinkable weeks ago, but now felt as natural as breathing. Marcus saved our lives, he said. He showed us kindness when he could have let us die. He taught us things about cooperation and compassion that our people never. Elder Vex's backhanded blow sent Zash flying across the room. The young Kithari crashed into a wall and slumped to the floor, blue blood trickling from his mouth. Compassion, Elder Vex spat, the final weakness that destroys warrior races. The Kithari have survived for millennia because we are strong, because we eliminate weakness wherever we find it. Marcus moved then, rushing to Zash's side to check his injuries. It was an instinctive response. The human need to help someone who was hurt overriding any consideration of his own safety. The sight of the small, defenseless human kneeling beside the injured Kithari seemed to drive Elder Vex into a rage beyond reason. He raised his massive clawed hand, preparing to strike Marcus down. No, Kira and Thek shouted simultaneously, throwing themselves between the elder and the human. For a moment the tableau held frozen. Elder Vex stared down at the two young Kithari who were protecting a creature their people considered prey. Behind him his warriors shifted uneasily, clearly uncomfortable with the situation they were witnessing. You would protect this thing? Elder Vex asked, his voice deadly quiet. You would choose the life of a prey animal over loyalty to your own species? We would protect our friend, Kira said firmly. Someone who showed us more honor and kindness in a few weeks than our own people showed us in our entire lives. Friend. Elder Vex repeated the word like it was a curse. You use the language of the weak. Kithari do not have friends. We have allies of convenience and enemies to be destroyed, nothing more. Marcus stood up slowly, gently moving Kira and Thek aside. With respect, Elder Vex, he said. That attitude is exactly what destroyed the architects. The elder's eyes narrowed. What do you know of the architects? I know they were once like you, Marcus replied. Strong, proud, convinced that might made right. They built a great civilization, conquered worlds, dominated other species, and in the end, they destroyed themselves because they forgot that true strength comes from unity, not domination. You lie. The evidence is all around us, Marcus said, gesturing toward the shelter's walls where his research data was displayed. I've spent 2 years studying their ruins, translating their records. They left behind a warning written in their final days. Strength without wisdom is destruction. Power without compassion is death. Elder Vex studied the displays, his expression unreadable. The other warriors behind him muttered among themselves in their own language, clearly disturbed by what they were seeing. Even if this is true, Elder Vex said finally, it changes nothing. The Kithari way has kept us strong for thousands of years. We will not be weakened by the soft philosophies of prey animals. Then you'll make the same mistakes the architects made, Zash said, pulling himself upright against the wall. And in 1,000 years some other species will be studying our ruins and wondering how we could have been so blind. Elder Vex turned to face him, and for a moment, something flickered in the ancient warrior's eyes. Doubt perhaps, or recognition of an uncomfortable truth. But the moment passed and his expression hardened again. Enough, these cubs are contaminated beyond redemption. They will die here as they should have died weeks ago, and this human will die with them, as an example to any others who might seek to corrupt our youth with weakness. He raised his hand again, claws extended, but this time all 3 cubs moved to shield Marcus, their own claws drawn and ready to fight. You'll have to go through us first, Thek said, his young voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. Elder Vex paused, staring at the 3 young Kithari, who were prepared to die protecting a member of another species. Behind him, his warriors exchanged glances that spoke of growing unease with their mission. The standoff stretched on, tension filling the air like electricity before a storm. Outside, the wind howled across the frozen landscape, carrying with it the promise of change. What happened next would determine not just the fate of 3 exiled cubs and 1 human xenoarchaeologist, but possibly the future of an entire civilization that was about to discover whether its strength lay in the rigidity of ancient traditions or the flexibility to grow and adapt. Kelder Vex's claws stopped inches from Marcus's throat. not because of mercy, but because of the sound that filled the shelter, the deep, rumbling growl of 3 young Cathari prepared to fight to the death. In all his centuries of life, Elder Vex had never seen cubs stand against an elder. The action was so unprecedented that it shocked him into stillness. Behind him, his warriors shifted uncomfortably, their weapons wavering as they faced a situation their training had never prepared them for. "You would spill Cathari blood to protect this creature?" Elder Vex asked, his voice filled with genuine disbelief. "We would spill blood to protect someone who has earned our loyalty," Zash replied, his blue markings now blazing with determination instead of shame. "Something our own people never tried to earn." The words hit Elder Vex like a physical blow. In Cathari society, loyalty was taken for granted, enforced through fear and tradition. The idea that it might need to be earned was so foreign that he struggled to process it. "Marcus," Kira said quietly, never taking her eyes off the elder. "Tell him about the final chamber." Marcus nodded, understanding immediately what she meant. During their weeks of exploration, they had discovered something in the deepest part of the Architect ruins, something that had changed all their perspectives on what it meant to be strong. "Elder Vex," Marcus said, his voice calm despite the claws at his throat. "There's something you need to see, something that might change your understanding of what happened to the Architects." "I have no interest in ancient history," the elder growled. "You should," Thek interrupted, "because if you don't learn from it, you're going to repeat it." Something in the youngest cub's voice gave Elder Vex pause. Thek had always been considered the weakest of his generation, too small and gentle for the warrior's path. Yet now he stood ready to fight an elder to protect his beliefs. That transformation demanded explanation. "Show me," Elder Vex said finally. The journey to the ruins was tense and silent. Elder Vex and his warriors formed a threatening escort around Marcus and the cubs, weapons ready in case this was some kind of trap. But as they walked among the ancient structures, even the hardened Cathari warriors couldn't help but be impressed by the scale and craftsmanship of what they saw. Marcus led them deep into the complex, through passages that had been cleared of ice and debris over his months of careful work. The cubs had memorized the route, pointing out details that Marcus had taught them to recognize, architectural elements that told stories about how the Architects lived and worked. Finally, they reached the chamber that had changed everything. It was vast, with a domed ceiling that soared high above them. The walls were covered with murals showing the history of the Architect civilization, from its humble beginnings to its eventual destruction. But it was the center of the room that drew everyone's attention. There, preserved in some kind of stasis field that still functioned after thousands of years, was the final message of the Architects. Not carved in stone or written on paper, but preserved as a 3-dimensional recording that played when activated. Marcus touched a control panel, and the chamber filled with light and sound. Ghostly figures appeared in the air above them, the Architects themselves recording their final words for whoever might find them. The Architects were not what any of them had expected. They were tall and graceful, with features that suggested both strength and intelligence. But what was most striking was the diversity among them. Some were clearly one species, others were different entirely. Large and small, predator and prey, all working together as equals. The recording began to play, and Marcus's universal translator worked to convert the ancient language into something they could understand. "We, who built the greatest civilization in galactic history, leave this message as a warning to those who come after," the lead figure said. Her voice carried the weight of absolute authority, but also deep sadness. "We achieved everything we thought we wanted. We conquered 1,000 worlds. We commanded the loyalty of 100 species. We believed that strength was the only truth that mattered." The image shifted, showing scenes of the Architect Empire at its height. Massive fleets of ships, worlds transformed by their technology, species brought under their control through superior force. "But in our pursuit of strength," the figure continued, "we forgot why strength matters. We forgot that the purpose of power is to protect those who cannot protect themselves. We forgot that true leadership serves others, not itself." More images flowed past them, scenes of rebellion, civil war, species turning against their Architect overlords, the Empire tearing itself apart from within. In the end, those we had dominated rose against us, not because they were stronger, but because we had given them no choice. We had become the very thing we claimed to protect against, a force of destruction rather than creation. Elder Vex watched in silence, his red eyes reflecting the light from the recording. His warriors stood behind him, equally transfixed by what they were seeing. "If you who find this message are strong," the architect leader said, "remember that strength without wisdom is just destruction waiting to happen. If you rule others, rule through service, not domination. If you lead others, lead them to be better than they were, not to serve your glory." The recording began to fade, but not before showing one final image, the architects' last attempt to change their ways, working alongside the species they had once dominated to try to save their dying civilization. Too little, too late, but proof that even the proudest could learn humility when faced with extinction. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of ancient machinery. Elder Vex stared at the spot where the recording had played, his expression unreadable. "They were weak," he said finally, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "No," Marcus replied gently. "They were strong, but they used their strength wrong. Just like the Cathari are doing now." "You dare," Elder Vex began, then stopped. Around them, his warriors were studying the murals on the walls, reading the story of a civilization that had made the same choices their own people were making. "Elder Vex," Zash said, stepping forward. "We've lived here for weeks with Marcus. We've learned things that our people never taught us. We've learned that protecting someone weaker than you doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong in ways that fighting can't. We've learned," Kira added, "that different kinds of strength can work together instead of trying to destroy each other. And we've learned," Thek finished, "that sometimes the smallest person in the room has the biggest heart." Elder Vex looked at each of them in turn. These were not the same cubs who had failed their trial of fangs weeks ago. They stood straighter, spoke with more confidence, and showed a kind of inner strength that had nothing to do with claws or fangs. "What would you have me do?" he asked finally. "Abandon thousands of years of tradition? Tell the council that everything we believe is wrong?" "Tell them the truth," Marcus said simply. "Tell them what you've seen here. Let them decide for themselves." Elder Vex was quiet for a long time, studying the ancient chamber around them. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than angry. "The council will not accept this easily. Many will see it as weakness, as corruption by alien influence. Then we'll show them it's not," Zash said. "We'll prove that this new way of thinking makes us stronger, not weaker." "How?" Marcus smiled, the expression no longer strange to the cubs who had learned to recognize it as a sign of hope and determination. "By building something new," he said, "not an empire based on domination, but a community based on cooperation. Right here on Ice Vault, where things that should have died found a way to live instead." Elder Vex looked around the chamber one more time, then at his warriors who were clearly struggling with what they had seen and heard. Some of them looked angry and confused, but others showed signs of thoughtfulness that suggested the seeds of change had been planted. "Very well," he said finally. "We will return to Kithera Prime, all of us. You three cubs will face the council again, but this time you will not face them as failures. You will face them as ambassadors of a new understanding." He paused, then looked directly at Marcus. "And you, human, will come with us. If you truly believe that your way is better than ours, then prove it before those who matter most." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with Ice Vault's cold. To appear before the Cathari Council would almost certainly mean death. But looking at the three cubs who had become his friends, who had changed so much during their time together, he knew he had no choice. "I'll come," he said. As they prepared to leave the ancient chamber, Elder Vex paused at the threshold. "Tell me, human," he said, "are you afraid?" "Terrified," Marcus admitted honestly. "Good," Elder Vex said, and for the first time there was something like respect in his voice. "Fear is honest. It means you understand the risk you're taking. Then why are you taking it too?" Kira asked. Elder Vex considered the question seriously. "Because," he said slowly, "I have seen what happens when a civilization becomes so rigid that it cannot adapt, and I would rather my people learn to bend than watch them break." As they walked back through the ruins toward the waiting ships, the small group carried with them Mo,